months now, the NSA has been trying to scan my brain. I finally invested in some protection, so now I'm ready to begin this talk. It's getting a bit hot on my head, so put that to the side. So who here has any family or friends overseas? You can raise your hand, don't be shy. Right? So that's a lot of people. Now, who communicates with them online? I assume no one's sending carrier pigeons, right? Okay. So there is a chance that the NSA might have some of your information. Now, well, we'll get to that later. I know it's scary, but I want to start this. I've kind of been, for a very long time now, I've kind of been very distrustful of a strong, centralized government, and I'm kind of very cynical when it comes to these issues. And I realized just a few months ago, that I didn't really know much about the NSA, its history, or what it even does now, except outside from like a few jokes I've made with my friends that are kind of like vague and overbloated. So I decided that I'd do some research on it. So this is the research, right? Okay, so we're gonna go back in time. We're gonna start with a bit of history. So the NSA was created in 1952. It was a Cold War institution, obviously to counterintelligence with the Soviet Union. And it was heavily restricted because around the 60s and 70s, it went under a lot of controversy when it was found out that the NSA had wiretapped and was doing a lot of surveillance on various influential civil rights activists, such as Martin Luther King, since at the time the federal government was greatly opposed to desegregation, as well as they thought he was a communist. So now, our kind of stereotypical idea of the NSA comes in the wake of the September 11th attacks. Now, in the wake of these attacks, of course, the War on Terror began. And with the War on Terror, the Patriot Act was passed. Now, the Patriot Act is a highly dense, technical piece of legislation that was rushed through Congress. Now, I don't think if something is dense, technical, and rushed through Congress, I don't think that's ever a good thing. Now, here's another fun fact. Okay, you're a member of Congress, and you have this bill that's clearly very important to Americans. You have three options. A, you can read it all yourself. B, you can at least get a summary. Or C, don't read it. Now, raise your hand if you pick A. Raise your hand. Oh, yeah? Okay, raise your hand if you pick B. Raise your hand if you pick C. If you pick C, that's exactly what most of Congress did. Most people didn't actually read the bill, and it was passed, and no one realized at the time that the massive detrimental effect it would have on the privacy and the security of American citizens. Now, what the Patriot Act effectively did is it massively deregulated the powers of the NSA, opening up its powers to conduct surveillance on foreign entities as well on American citizens. And out of this comes the very famous Stellar Wind program, which, if you know anything about the Snowden revelation, was kind of the big program that came to light. And the Stellar Wind program, for those who do not know, was the one that included the bulk collection of metadata on American citizens. This includes things like business transactions, emails, telephone communications, and it was not very good, to say the least. Now, eventually, this would be exposed. Previously, since the NSA was in a guise of extreme secrecy, no one really knew about it at all, except for people inside the NSA. Until in June of 2013, Edward Snowden from a hotel in Hong Kong released several classified documents to journalists across the United States. Now, most people were not happy to find out that their information was being gathered and collected in massive data facilities by the NSA. Personally, I would not be either. So a lot of people at the time, a lot of the opposition argued that these programs were necessary to protect Americans and they were effective in fighting terrorism. So, of course, people wanted to see, is this actually true? And, well, we've reached a consensus that it simply wasn't. So, a study that was conducted by New America, which is a independent research group, the think tank. So they investigated 225 terrorist cases, right? And they saw how many of them were actually started by an NSA, something, an investigation within the NSA, versus how many were started by a traditional investigation. And they found that only 7.5%, so that's these ones that stand out right here, 7.5% of them were actually started by some sort of investigation by the NSA. So compared to the massive risk to American privacy and the amount of money that we spent, most people decided that this was simply not worth it. Now, it's to be said that it wasn't just ineffective. It was also very harmful to America and some of our basic freedoms. Now, another study that was done by Pew Research, as well as Berkeley Law Technology Journal, there's a whole compilation of studies where they investigated Wikipedia pages specifically linked with terrorism, terrorist groups, and other incidents, and they looked at the amount of views the website, that specific page, got before the Snowden incident and after, and they found that it went down. So they found that they found a correlation that people were actually began avoiding looking up, Googling things and searching things related to terrorism out of almost a fear, after the Snowden incident. And this is definitely not good, to say the least. Now, since then, of course, no one really liked it. So in 2015, the Freedom Act was eventually passed. Now, the Freedom Act ended a lot of the bulk collection of metadata that the NSA was doing, and it restricted the NSA greatly. So if you're wondering, well, the Freedom Act was passed, so why am I up here still talking about this? Well, it's because just like with any law, there's a lot of weird little loopholes, and there's still a lot to be done. So one thing that was kind of changed up a bit with the Freedom Act was the FISA Court. Now, the FISA Court is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Association. And basically what it does is it's an internal court inside the United States, and it gives out warrants to the NSA and other organizations like the FBI and the CIA to investigate and conduct surveillance on people overseas, as well as people within the United States that they believe are working with the governments, with the foreign governments and organizations. And essentially, if you have someone in maybe India, for example, and the NSA gets a warrant on them to investigate them, they get their data, right? But they don't just get their data, they get the communications and the communications and the data of the people they're in contact with. Now what that means is that if you're an American in contact with that person in India, they will get your information by proxy. And because the NSA basically has free-range data collection of foreign nationals, since the FISA court is mostly filled with people that are already in and affiliated with the NSA and already typically heavily agree with the NSA's programs, it's basically a rubber stamp, meaning that, in a sense, it's very easy for them to accidentally collect information on tons of Americans, especially considering how interconnected our world is. Now, there's actually a really cool solution for this, right? It's called homeopathic encryption. What homeopathic encryption is, it's cooler than it sounds, okay, I swear, right? So they get like a big chunk of data, right? And it's kind of like using Control F on like a computer, right? Where you search for specific terms, and then it shows you, the terms, right? So when they have the big chunk of data, it's all encrypted at first. And then the NSA can go and use a program, and it only unencrypts data that is relevant to whatever case they are investigating. And that saves a lot of the other information. It means that they're not able to then take the other extra information that is not relevant to the investigation and just store it somewhere. Now, I know I said before that a lot of the NSA's mass data collection programs were ended, but they still do have some, as well as they are able to still get buy information and get information from companies on certain people. So there's currently a bill going through Congress called the Ending Mass Collection of America's Phone Records Act. People are geniuses with the names. And so it proposes, of course, to end the mass collection of America's phone records. Because the NSA still is able to collect some of the data. And I think that this should clearly be supported. I don't know about you, but I don't really want them having my information. So now it's important to remember that we live in a digital age. And the internet is an important hub for information and ideas. And it's how many people find themselves expressing their rights outlined in the Constitution. As I showed you the study before, where they found that people were actually avoiding Googling certain things, these kind of surveillance programs can have an effect on people and how they actually express their things like the First Amendment and the freedom, the right to expression. They can start almost censoring themselves. And this definitely is scary and very telling of the effects of something like this. As we move forward, we have to remember that privacy rights are important because they serve to protect the openness that the internet holds for us and the amount of possibility it has for the sharing of ideas and expression of ourselves. So, and I don't think that it would be very good if that all disappeared. So, I don't think you would either. Thank you.